It's difficult to attribute the origins of blended learning to a particular event or moment in time. However, in 2001, the American Society for Training Development published an online article that described blended learning as one of the latest trends in the training industry. One might argue that blended learning is no more than the next big thing in education, which logically follows from distance education, open learning, flexible delivery learning, online learning, and e-learning. In this respect, blended learning might be seen as the normalisation or institutionalisation of e-learning. Such changes are consistent with the idea of bricks and clicks, which emerged as a business model in the 1990s. In general, regular changes in education nomenclature might be ascribed to governments that wish to maintain some level of instability in educational systems, commercial interests that are continually looking for a market edge, or academics who look to maintain a stream of publications. One consistent feature of change from one label to the next has been the general justifications made by policymakers and supported by commercial interests. That is, the next version of education will improve access, improve the effectiveness and efficiency of education. These claims frequently remain untested in any meaningful way. Whilst there's no unified definition of blended learning, there is little doubt that the contemporary idea of blended learning has emerged alongside rapid developments in information and communication technologies. These developments have had a major influence in terms of the distribution of content, communication, interaction and business processes in the fields of education. To the degree that there is consensus about the nature of blended learning, it's reasonably summarised by Garrison and Vaughan as the organic integration of thoughtfully selected and complementary face-to-face and online approaches and techniques. Bonk and Graham graphically represent this view of blended learning as a change in relationship between face-to-face and e-learning. These convergences might occur at activity, course program or institutional levels. That is, blended learning is associated with the convergence of the traditional face-to-face learning with distributed learning ideas and new technologies. The idea that education reforms as a result of the convergence of different delivery models is not new. For example, pre-internet, Millar discussed the convergence of distance education with campus-based learning, technology communications and technology. More recently, Stacey and Gerbic also discussed the impact of new technologies on the future of distance education as an identity. A weakness of the convergence models is that they adopt a structural perspective which tends to assume that the normative approach to learning is either face-to-face or e-learning. Alternatively, Garrison and Vaughan identify the potentially more transformational nature of blended learning and asserting that blended learning is no more about reshaping and enhancing the traditional classroom than it is about making e-learning more acceptable. In this view, the idea of blended learning is broader than simply the integration of face-to-face and technology-based learning, which are primarily concerned with the mode of delivery. If we move beyond this perspective, then blended learning represents the potential, if not the reality, for transformation of the pedagogic assumptions upon which other decisions are grounding. So what is blended learning? At the most structural, superficial level, blended learning represents an educational terminology that maintains the purposes and outcomes of learning while altering the ways in which opportunities are offered, as defined by criteria such as the location of learning, the degree of separation between teacher and learners, the delivery strategy and media used, and the degree of integration of technology. Whilst there is an alteration in the mode of delivery, particularly as it relates to the use of contemporary technology, there is no change in relation to who makes decisions and in whose interests. At a more fundamental level, blended learning offers the opportunity to make explicit and assess the assumptions about the purposes of education, who benefits and who is disadvantaged. These questions go to the issues of power relations and the locus of control over decision making in education. If you'd like to hear more about blended learning, have a look at my video on blended learning models, which is also on this site.